In the bitter winter 1982, 3 young American students vanished without a trace during an exchange trip to Russia. Decades passed without answers, leaving families haunted by questions and grief. Then, 29 years later, travelers hiking through a remote Russian forest stumble upon mysterious belongings buried deep beneath the snow, belongings unmistakably tied to the lost students. What secrets lie hidden beneath the frozen landscape? And what really happened to those teenagers on that fateful day? Moscow in the winter of 1982 was a place caught between 2 worlds, beautiful yet cold, vibrant yet reserved. Snow blanketed the city, its crisp whiteness contrasting sharply with the gray, towering Soviet-era buildings. The broad avenues buzzed with buses and vintage cars, sputtering smoke, their engines struggling against the freezing air. People moved briskly along the sidewalks, wrapped tightly in thick coats, scarves, and heavy boots. The tension of the Cold War lingered subtly in every corner, in wary glances, whispered conversations, and the occasional stern gaze of policemen. Amid this cold yet fascinating backdrop, a group of American students, young and spirited, explored the city with wide-eyed wonder and laughter. Among them were Sarah Evans, Mike Harper, and Tom Brooks, inseparable friends, each uniquely memorable. Sarah, the artistic dreamer of the trio, had sparkling blue eyes full of curiosity, her blonde curls bouncing beneath a knitted wool hat. She took in the world to the lens of her camera, capturing moments in vibrant, vivid photographs that reflected her warm personality. Mike was quieter, thoughtful, and analytical. His dark hair was neatly combed back, and his deep, contemplative eyes seemed to always be absorbing every detail of their surroundings. He often carried a small notebook, quietly jotting down observations, quotes, and sketches. Then there was Tom, charmingly charismatic, the life of every gathering, proudly wearing his signature cowboy hat, even in the bitter cold. He frequently joked and laughed loudly, his easygoing nature instantly putting others at ease. Originally from Texas, he teased Sarah and Mike about their aversion to the cold, bragging playfully about his supposed resistance thanks to the tough Texan winters, although in reality, he shivered as much as they did. Their interactions with the broader group were filled with good-natured banter. Conversations revolved around humorous misunderstandings of the Russian language, marveling at strange local customs, and endless teasing about who could survive the brutal Russian winter the longest. Sarah's repeated struggles with Russian greetings provided endless amusement for the group, with Tom laughing. "Sarah, you're offending half of Moscow every time you say hello." Mike chuckled gently, interjecting softly, "Honestly, Sarah, your Russian sounds more like German to me." "Very funny," she replied, feigning offense, her cheeks rosy from laughter and cold. Their professor and chaperone, Mr. Thompson, a strict and humorless man in his 50s, often struggled to keep the energetic students in line. His stern demeanor and meticulous rules became the group's common enemy, and they constantly sought harmless ways to evade his tight supervision, sparking many moments of comedic rebellion. On one particularly icy morning, the students were set to visit a dense forest just outside Moscow, renowned for its dark beauty and snow-covered trees. As they walked along the trail, bundled in heavy winter gear, the trio lagged purposely behind. "All right, listen up," Tom whispered conspiratorially, a mischievous smile tugging at his lips. "We ditch Thompson, explore a little, and catch up later." Sarah hesitated but smiled, intrigued. "Are we sure that's a good idea?" Mike adjusted his scarf thoughtfully, eyes glinting with curiosity. "It's just a few minutes, Sarah. We'll be back before he even notices." Convinced by the sense of adventure and the trust they had in one another, Sarah nodded, laughing softly. They ducked behind a thick curtain of snowy trees, carefully hiding their footprints by stepping lightly into the deeper snow. The forest around them was eerily quiet, the muffled sounds of the main group fading into the distance. Trees stood tall and silent, branches heavy with fresh snow, creating a natural canopy that filtered the dim winter sunlight into soft, ghostly beams. "This place is amazing," Sarah whispered, lifting her camera to capture the surreal scenery. "Look over here," Mike called softly, pointing towards an unusual cluster of trees. They stepped closer, exploring the untouched beauty, breathing in deeply the crisp air filled with the scent of pine and frost. Tom wandered slightly ahead, cowboy hat tilted back as he admired the serenity. "Guys, I swear we could get totally lost out here and no one would ever find us," he joked lightly, shaking his head in amused awe. The friends laughed lightly, the sound carrying briefly through the quiet woods. Then, in a moment so subtle that it would be replayed endlessly by the ones who loved them, the laughter faded abruptly. A strange silence settled. Their steps seemed suddenly muted, absorbed by the dense snow. Sarah's smile faded first, a chill unrelated to the cold suddenly creeping down her spine. "Tom? Mike?" Her voice, now tense, echoed oddly in the emptiness. Mike turned around slowly, frowning deeply. "Did you hear something?" Tom moved closer to them, serious now, eyes darting warily among the shadows of the trees. "Maybe we should go back," he murmured cautiously. The atmosphere shifted rapidly from playful freedom to something more sinister. The trio quickened their pace, turning to retrace their steps, but the path was no longer clear. The forest seemed suddenly unfamiliar, the once friendly trees now looming and identical, every direction looking the same. Panic rose swiftly, their breaths quickened in small, fearful clouds. "Guys, calm down, we just got turned around," Mike said, struggling to hide his anxiety. "Tom, did you?" Sarah started, but her voice caught. She turned sharply, sensing something, someone perhaps, nearby, and then silence. Absolute, terrifying silence. Days later, back in the United States, the remaining group of students arrived home abruptly, the joy of their experience shattered completely by the disappearance of their friends. At the Boise airport, Robert Evans stood waiting anxiously, eyes searching desperately among the arriving passengers. As the group emerged, the expressions on their faces instantly sent dread sinking into his heart. "What happened? Where's Sarah?" Robert's voice trembled, panic already flooding his veins. Mr. Thompson approached, his stern expression now shadowed by grief and helplessness. "Mr. Evans, Sarah, Mike, and Tom, they're missing. They wandered off into the woods, and we couldn't find them." Robert's world shattered in an instant. The noise of the busy airport faded around him, replaced only by the deafening pulse of despair. Back at home that evening, the air felt colder, emptier. Robert sat heavily on his couch, hands shaking as he stared blankly at a framed photograph of Sarah. Her smile, captured forever in that one joyful moment, seemed impossibly distant. Suddenly, the piercing ring of the telephone cut sharply through the silence. Robert jolted, his heart pounding, breath quickening. He reached for the receiver slowly, praying for news, for hope, but dreading more grief. "Hello!" His voice cracked, barely audible, as he braced himself for whatever came next. The phone crackled, the distant voice on the line clear yet chilling, and Robert's eyes widened with shock and uncertainty as he listened, gripping the photograph of his daughter tightly, desperate for answers. What Robert Evans heard next changed everything, promising answers, but bringing with them only deeper mysteries. Boise, Idaho, 2011. Robert Evans' home felt trapped in time. Photographs of Sarah lined the walls, vibrant reminders of a past life. A life stolen in an instant nearly 3 decades ago. The rooms once filled with laughter and warmth now echoed hollowly. Robert's daily routine had become painfully repetitive. Mornings spent staring blankly at old photographs, afternoons pacing his quiet rooms, and evenings sitting silently in his worn armchair, haunted by what-ifs. At 62, Robert's hair had turned entirely gray, his face etched with deep lines of sorrow. His eyes, though weary, still flickered occasionally with a fierce hope that refused to fully extinguish. His only companions were fading memories of his daughter's laughter and the aching emptiness she left behind. On this particular cold March morning, Robert was sitting at the kitchen table, slowly stirring his untouched coffee, lost in thoughts. The abrupt ringing of the phone jolted him sharply. He hesitated, heart pounding, every unexpected call raising both hope and fear. With a trembling hand, he picked up the receiver. "Hello?" A thick accent answered hesitantly from the other end. "Mr. Evans? This is Sergei Ivanov, calling from Moscow." Robert's chest tightened, memories flooding him instantly. "Yes, this is Robert Evans," he said shakily, gripping the edge of the table. "Sir," Sergei continued gently. Sensing Robert's tension, a group of hikers discovered some personal belongings in the snow near Moscow. "We believe they belong to your daughter and her friends." Robert felt his legs weaken. He sank into a nearby chair, breath catching painfully in his throat. "Sarah? Are you sure?" "Quite sure, Mr. Evans. There was a cowboy hat, some neckties, and an American flag. They matched the descriptions from the original police reports." Tears blurred Robert's vision. "The cowboy hat, Tom's hat. Thank you," he whispered, barely audible. "I'll be there as soon as possible." As soon as the call ended, Robert knew what he had to do, but navigating a foreign investigation alone was impossible. Within hours, he found himself seated across from Jane Mitchell, a private investigator renowned for her sharp mind and relentless nature. Jane, 45, exuded confidence and intensity. Her short brown hair framed a face hardened by years of difficult cases. She had an unusual habit of frequently chewing peppermint candies, especially during tense conversations, a quirk Robert noticed immediately. "Why peppermint?" he asked softly, breaking their initial silence. Jane smiled faintly, crunching the candy deliberately. "It clears my head, makes me think straight." Robert nodded, momentarily amused by her straightforward honesty. "I need clear thinking more than anything," he murmured. "My daughter's been gone nearly 30 years. This might be my only chance." Jane leaned forward, serious now. "If answers are out there, Mr. Evans will find them. I promise you that." Within days, Robert and Jane landed in Moscow. As they exited the plane, stepping onto Russian soil, Robert felt a wave of emotions overwhelm him. Everything felt familiar yet foreign. Memories of 1982 surged back vividly. The hopeful excitement of Sarah's departure and the devastating news of her disappearance. The city had transformed since Robert had last visited. Brighter lights and modern buildings mixed oddly with lingering relics of the Soviet era. But beneath the changes, the old atmosphere still lingered, triggering deep nostalgia and sorrow. Arriving at the forest, the site where the hikers had discovered belongings, Robert felt an immediate chill, not just from the frigid air, but from memories of Sarah's final moments of freedom. Jane watched him closely, silently offering support. They moved slowly through deep snow, branches snapping underfoot. The forest was hauntingly quiet, just as Robert imagined it had been the day Sarah vanished. Soon, they reached a taped-off area marked by local authorities. Carefully, Robert stepped forward, his pulse quickening. Half buried in snow were unmistakable items. Tom's old cowboy hat, now faded and battered. The colorful ties Mike favored, and a small American flag, once proudly waved by Sarah during their trip. Robert knelt carefully, lifting the flag gently. His eyes filled with tears as he brushed snow off the fabric. Jane observed thoughtfully, her sharp eyes catching something else. "Mr. Evans," she said quietly, stepping toward him. "Look at this." Robert looked up quickly. Following her gaze, his heart skipped. Nearby, partially concealed by fresh snow, were distinct, fresh footprints. Someone else had been here recently, very recently. "Those aren't ours," Jane noted, crunching another peppermint candy, her voice hushed yet intense. "Someone knew we were coming." Robert stood abruptly, gripping Sarah's flag tightly. Could someone still be out here? Could they know something after all this time? Jane nodded slowly, determination clear in her eyes. "Let's follow them carefully." Their hearts raced as they traced the footprints deeper into the woods, only to have the trail vanish mysteriously near a small clearing. Robert glanced around desperately, frustration building. "What now?" Jane's expression hardened, but her tone remained calm. We ask around discreetly. Someone nearby must have seen something. Returning to the edge of the forest, they noticed a modest wooden cabin nestled discreetly between snow-laden trees. Approaching cautiously, they knocked. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a tall, rugged man in heavy clothes, obviously startled by the visitors. He eyed them suspiciously, grumbling greetings in heavily accented Russian. Jane addressed him politely, switching easily to Russian, but something about the man's hesitant responses felt off. When he accidentally slipped into perfect, unmistakable American slang, Robert and Jane exchanged quick glances. Jane's gaze intensified, her curiosity evident. "You're American," Jane stated calmly, staring directly at the man. He hesitated, clearly flustered. I used to live there, yes," he admitted reluctantly, eyes darting anxiously. Robert stepped forward, hope rising again. "Were you here in 1982? My daughter disappeared nearby then." The man stiffened visibly, shaking his head quickly. No, I wasn't here. Please leave me alone." Jane nodded slowly, withdrawing. "All right, we apologize for disturbing you." Once out of earshot, Jane spoke firmly. "He's lying, and he's hiding something. I'll dig deeper into his background." Robert nodded slowly, staring back toward the cabin. His heart pounded. Could this stranger hold the key to Sarah's disappearance after all these years? That night, sleepless in his Moscow hotel room, Robert clutched Sarah's flag tightly, memories crashing down relentlessly. He thought of her laughter, her dreams, and how much of her life he'd missed. As dawn broke softly over the city, he knew this journey was only beginning, the past beckoning relentlessly forward. Early the next morning, Jane met Robert in the hotel lobby, her expression deeply serious. "I pulled some records overnight. Our friend in the woods. His real name isn't Russian. It's Michael Harper." Robert's eyes widened in shock. "Mike, Sarah's friend Mike? Alive and hiding all these years?" Jane nodded gravely. "We need answers from him, and we're not leaving until we get them." As they prepared to confront Mike again, Robert felt a strange mixture of hope and fear. Could Mike be involved in Sarah's fate? And if so, what secrets had he been hiding for nearly 3 decades? Returning to the forest cabin, their hearts raced in tense silence. Yet, upon arrival, their pulses quickened further. Mike was gone, and fresh footprints again stretched deeper into the snow-laden forest. Robert glanced anxiously at Jane, desperation clear in his eyes. "We can't lose him now. He has the answers." Jane tightened her coat decisively, eyes focused sharply on the forest ahead. "Then let's follow quickly. We're closer than we've ever been." Together, they moved urgently forward, deeper into the silent snow-covered woods, unaware of the darker truths awaiting them just beyond sight. The snow crunched softly beneath their feet as Robert and Jane hurried deeper into the dense Russian forest, following the clear, fresh tracks. Each step was cautious, each breath hanging visibly in the cold air, their hearts pounding as the quiet would close around them, thick with secrets. Jane's eyes were sharp, intensely focused on the trail. Her mind raced, chewing relentlessly on her peppermint candies, each crunch marking another thought, another theory pieced together. She'd solved countless mysteries before, but none carried this much emotional weight. Behind her, Robert moved steadily but silently, anxiety etched deeply into his face. The tracks led them along a narrow path, winding carefully through trees heavy with snow, eventually opening to a small clearing. At the edge stood a weathered wooden cabin, its structure leaning slightly, smoke gently rising from a chimney, proof someone was home. Jane paused briefly, turning to Robert. "Let me do the talking. We need to keep him calm." Robert nodded quietly, anxiety clear in his tired eyes. "All right," he whispered, voice strained. "But we need answers." Approaching the cabin cautiously, Jane knocked firmly on the heavy wooden door. Footsteps shuffled inside, hesitant and reluctant, before the door creaked open. Ivan appeared again, eyes wide with poorly hidden fear, attempting to mask his surprise with forced calmness. "Back so soon?" he asked roughly, voice tinged with annoyance and a faint American accent breaking through his practiced Russian disguise. Jane noticed immediately, her instincts alert. "We just have a few more questions, Ivan," she replied calmly, deliberately emphasizing his name to test his reaction. Ivan hesitated, glancing nervously between them. "I've told you everything. I don't want trouble." Robert stepped forward gently, desperation coloring his words. "Please, my daughter disappeared here almost 30 years ago. You're American. Maybe you can help." Ivan flinched subtly at the word American, quickly looking away. I've lived here a long time," he muttered awkwardly, slipping back into slightly accented English. "I don't remember anything about any missing kids." Jane eyed him carefully, sensing the facade cracking. "Then why hide your accent? Seems like a lot of effort for someone innocent." Ivan's eyes narrowed defensively, body tensing noticeably. "You're mistaken," he snapped sharply, reverting clumsily back into his rough Russian accent. "I'm Russian, born here." Jane raised an eyebrow skeptically, crunching another peppermint loudly. "Of course you are," she said dryly, exchanging a quick glance with Robert. Robert took a breath, voice trembling slightly. "My daughter's name was Sarah. She vanished along with 2 friends, Mike Harper and Tom Brooks. Are those names familiar?" At the mention of the names, especially Mike Harper, Ivan visibly recoiled. "No, I don't know those names," he stammered unconvincingly. Jane's gaze hardened. "Really? Because we found their belongings in the snow, just a short walk from your cabin." Ivan's eyes flickered briefly toward the trees behind them, his pulse quickening. "I don't know anything," he repeated, desperation creeping into his voice. Jane stepped forward slowly, voice steady but insistent. "Ivan, lying only makes things worse. We just want the truth. Where did you live before this cabin? New York? Texas?" Ivan opened his mouth, instinctively starting to reply in fluent English. "Look, it's not what you—" He stopped abruptly, realizing his mistake, frustration flashing across his face. Jane smiled faintly, the tension palpable. "You were saying?" Ivan looked cornered now, agitation clear. Robert watched anxiously, hope battling despair within him. "Please," he whispered brokenly, "if you know something, anything, just tell us." Ivan hesitated deeply, internal conflict clear in his expression. Finally, he sighed heavily, shoulders slumping slightly. "Come inside," he murmured reluctantly. "It's freezing out here." The interior of the cabin was cramped and dim, lit only by a faint glow from the fireplace. Walls were lined with shelves of neatly stacked firewood, rustic tools, and worn photographs, barely visible under layers of dust. Ivan moved slowly, silently, eyes avoiding contact. Jane scanned the room methodically, senses heightened, noting each detail carefully. Her gaze paused on a small desk in the corner, papers stacked haphazardly. Something half-hidden beneath them caught her eye. Robert spoke quietly, trying to connect with Ivan again. "What brought you here, so far from America?" Ivan shrugged stiffly. "Needed a new life, a fresh start," he replied evasively. Jane moved quietly toward the desk, subtly lifting papers to reveal a faded photograph beneath. Her breath caught sharply as she studied the image. 3 smiling teenagers in Moscow, familiar faces instantly recognizable. Sarah Evans, Tom Brooks, and unmistakably Mike Harper. Her voice trembled slightly. "Robert, look at this." Robert stepped forward quickly, heart pounding. As he saw his daughter's face clearly for the first time in decades, tears welled in his eyes. He turned sharply to Ivan, realization dawning painfully. "You're Mike Harper." Ivan's eyes widened in panic, darting frantically toward the door. I can't explain," he stammered desperately. "Mike, please," Robert pleaded emotionally, voice breaking. "Tell me what happened to Sarah. Tell me the truth." Ivan hesitated only a moment longer before bolting suddenly, shoving past him toward the open door. Jane reacted swiftly, grabbing at his arm, but Ivan twisted free, knocking furniture aside as he fled desperately into the snow-covered forest. "Mike!" Robert shouted desperately after him, voice echoing sharply through the silence. "Stop!" Without thinking, Jane and Robert rushed after him into the forest, footsteps heavy in the thick snow. Trees whipped past, their breath coming in sharp gasps as they struggled to keep Ivan in sight. The man ran wildly, panic overriding logic, stumbling occasionally but never slowing. Robert's mind spun chaotically, emotions crashing relentlessly. Relief at knowing Mike was alive, anguish over unanswered questions, fear that his chance at truth was slipping away. "Mike, please." Robert called again, desperation raw in his voice. "Just stop. We need to talk." Ahead, Ivan stumbled heavily, falling awkwardly to the ground. Jane and Robert quickly caught up, breathing heavily as they stood over him. Ivan looked up, fear and regret filling his eyes. "Why run?" Jane asked harshly, fighting to control her breathing, eyes fixed sharply on Ivan. Ivan's voice was hoarse, almost broken. "You don't understand. I can't face this." Robert knelt slowly beside him, voice quiet but firm. "Mike, whatever happened, we need to know. Please." Ivan stared miserably at the snow, finally nodding weakly. "All right," he whispered painfully. "I'll tell you." But even as he spoke, the forest seemed to close in tighter, shadows lengthening ominously around them, each word hanging heavily in the air, pregnant with hidden truths yet to be revealed. Snowflakes began to drift gently down from the heavy gray skies, settling softly on the shoulders of Robert, Jane, and the man they had known as Ivan, now undeniably revealed as Mike Harper. The cold Russian forest was thick around them, silence punctuated only by their ragged breathing after the frantic chase. Mike remained seated in the snow, eyes downcast, avoiding Robert's pleading gaze. The tension in the air was almost tangible. Jane stood quietly, carefully watching Mike's movements, sensing he was finally ready to speak. "Mike," Robert began, his voice shaken with a mix of hope and dread. "Please, just tell me, what happened to Sarah?" Mike's breath shuddered as he slowly looked up, eyes filled with deep anguish. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he whispered hoarsely, his voice strained from years of silence and isolation. Robert's expression hardened slightly, confusion and frustration battling within him. "Then explain it to me, Mike. Make me understand." Mike took a shaky breath, pulling his worn coat tighter around him. "After we left the group that day, we wandered deeper into the woods. We got lost, just like you thought. But then, by sheer luck or maybe fate, we found a small village at the edge of the forest." Jane listened silently, her intense gaze unwavering, her mind carefully piecing together each fragment of the story as Mike continued. "It was there I met Anna," Mike whispered, a faint smile briefly touching his lips before fading. "She was kind, beautiful, unlike anyone I'd ever met. We fell for each other instantly. I knew then I couldn't leave her behind." Robert frowned deeply, anger flickering in his tired eyes. "And what about Sarah and Tom? They had lives, Mike, families waiting. You had no right to decide for them." Mike flinched at Robert's words, guilt evident in his hunched posture. "At first, they agreed to stay a little longer. We thought we'd leave together later, that it would be fine. But Anna's father was a powerful local official, loyal to the regime. When he discovered us, things quickly spiraled out of control." Jane spoke quietly, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "What happened next, Mike?" He hesitated, swallowing painfully. "Anna's father accused us of spying. He threatened us all. He had the power to ruin lives, even end them. Anna begged me to stay, convinced her father would spare my friends if I stayed willingly, if we kept quiet." Robert shook his head in disbelief, voice thick with restrained emotion. "So you chose her over them? You let Sarah and Tom suffer, trapped in a country they couldn't leave?" Mike's eyes flashed painfully, tears beginning to form. "I was scared, Robert, terrified. I believed if we just waited, things would calm down. But Anna's father kept watching us, controlling our lives. Eventually, Sarah and Tom wanted out, demanded to leave. But by then it was too late. The situation had escalated, and the threat was real. Anna's father wouldn't hesitate to turn them over to authorities as spies. Mike looked away, voice barely audible. I panicked. I forced him to stay hidden, secluded from everyone. I kept telling myself it was temporary, just until things improved, but they never did. Jane's expression softened slightly. Understanding the depth of Mike's regret, she asked gently, "What happened to Anna?" Mike's shoulders slumped further, grief evident. She passed away 3 months ago. Cancer took her quickly. Before she died, she begged me to make things right. But I couldn't face the truth, couldn't face myself. Robert stood quietly, anger slowly giving way to a profound, weary sadness. "Are they still alive, Mike?" His voice was barely a whisper, desperate hope fighting overwhelming despair. Mike looked up sharply, a fragile glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Yes," he breathed softly. "Sarah and Tom are alive. They're safe, at least physically." Robert's knees nearly buckled with relief, the words echoing through him. Sarah was alive. He covered his face briefly, struggling to contain the overwhelming emotions that crashed through him. Joy mixed bitterly with anger, loss, and relief. Jane carefully observed both men, absorbing the emotional complexity. She felt empathy, yet struggled professionally with the moral ambiguity of Mike's choices. She spoke calmly, breaking the heavy silence. "Were they now?" Mike hesitated briefly before responding. "They're at another isolated house, deep in these woods. I go there often, bringing food and supplies. After Anna's death, I wanted to set them free, but I fear their reaction, feared the truth becoming public." Robert's voice was firm, resolute now. "Take us to them, Mike. It's time this nightmare ended." Mike nodded weakly, standing slowly, legs shaking slightly from both exhaustion and emotional release. Without another word, he began leading Robert and Jane to the dense forest, each step heavy with years of buried secrets. As they moved quietly beneath the towering trees, Jane's mind raced, crunching peppermint candies relentlessly, her thoughts a storm of questions, theories, and deep, unsettling feelings about this complicated case. She watched Robert carefully, recognizing the intense internal battle he faced, gratitude for finding Sarah alive, yet a deep rage toward Mike for the lost years, the stolen moments. Robert followed closely behind Mike, eyes fixed on the back of the man who had changed his life forever. He grappled internally, anger and bitterness warring fiercely with father's unconditional love and desperate need to see his daughter again. Each step closer to the truth felt heavier, yet he pressed forward, driven by the relentless need for answers and reunion. After what felt like hours of trudging through deep snow, the three emerged into a small clearing. Ahead of them, through a veil of gently falling snow, stood a house, isolated, weathered by years of harsh winters. Its windows were dark, reflecting the dim afternoon light. A thin column of smoke drifted lazily from the chimney, evidence of life within. Mike stopped abruptly, shoulders trembling slightly, eyes fixed anxiously on the house. "This is it," he murmured softly, voice heavy with shame and fear. "Sarah and Tom are inside." Robert felt his heart pound painfully against his chest, emotions swirling chaotically within him. He took a shaky step forward, the reality of seeing his daughter after nearly 3 decades suddenly overwhelming. He paused, drawing deep breaths, desperately steadying himself. Jane placed a comforting hand lightly on Robert's shoulder, silently conveying support and understanding. Robert looked gratefully at her, regaining composure slowly. Then, together, they stood in silence, staring at the darkened house that held the final answers, the painful truths, the long-awaited reunions, and the inescapable ghosts of a past none of them could outrun. The house stood silent in the gently falling snow, a structure lost in time. Its weathered wooden walls seemed weary, burdened by secrets and long-held suffering. Robert stood frozen for a moment, staring at the dim windows, his heart beating faster than ever. Jane stayed close, sensing the intense emotions radiating from him, while Mike hovered anxiously behind them, weighed down by his shame and guilt. "Let's go," Robert finally whispered, his voice shaking. They approached the front door, each step heavier than the last. Robert's hand trembled as he reached forward and pushed open the heavy wooden door. A rush of warmth met them from inside, mixed with a faint scent of burning wood. Robert stepped carefully into the dim room, heart in his throat. Inside, a quiet voice broke the silence. "Mike, is that you?" Robert's heart skipped painfully. The voice, soft, weary, but unmistakably Sarah's, triggered a flood of memories. He took another hesitant step forward. "Sarah." A figure slowly emerged from the shadows, pale and thin. Sarah stood there, her face lined with years of hidden sorrow, her blue eyes wide with disbelief. She stared at Robert, her voice trembling. "Dad? Is it really you?" "Yes, sweetheart," Robert whispered emotionally, tears already streaming down his face. He stretched out his arms, desperately needing to embrace the daughter he'd lost nearly 3 decades ago. "It's me." Sarah remained frozen momentarily, eyes glazed with disbelief and shock. Then, suddenly, she moved forward, collapsing into her father's arms. They held each other tightly, decades of pain melting into sobbing relief. Sarah buried her face into Robert's shoulder, shaking uncontrollably, her breathing ragged. "I thought I'd never see you again," she wept softly, gripping him fiercely. "I thought you forgot me." Robert's voice broke painfully. "I've thought of you every single day, Sarah. Every single day." Jane watched silently from the doorway, moved deeply by the reunion. Her heart ached for them both, understanding the vast emptiness that years of separation had carved into their lives. From the corner of the room, another figure emerged slowly. Tom stepped forward cautiously, looking worn and thin, eyes hollow with sadness. "Robert." Tom's voice was hoarse, filled with disbelief. Robert looked up, gently releasing Sarah enough to reach out toward Tom. "Tom, oh my God, you're alive." Tom managed a fragile smile, stepping forward into Robert's embrace. He stood stiffly at first and used a human contact, before finally surrendering into the comforting hug, emotions overwhelming him. As Robert held both Sarah and Tom close, the heavy reality of their years of captivity settled painfully upon him. Their bodies felt fragile, their emotions delicate. They had endured unimaginable isolation and pain, their spirits worn thin by time and betrayal. Sarah stepped back slightly, wiping her eyes, still shaking. She looked at Jane questioningly. Jane introduced herself gently, explaining her role in bringing Robert here. Sarah offered a faint, grateful smile, exhaustion and disbelief mingling in her expression. Jane carefully guided everyone toward chairs near a small fireplace, allowing space and quietness for emotions to settle. Robert's gaze moved continuously between Sarah and Tom, noticing the deep psychological scars etched on their faces, the hesitant movements, the lingering fear in their eyes. Sarah's voice trembled as she spoke first, her words barely audible. "I'm sorry, Dad. We should have tried harder to get out." Robert shook his head firmly, voice gentle yet resolute. "None of this is your fault, Sarah. Never blame yourself." Tom shifted uncomfortably, eyes fixed on the floor. "We wanted to leave, but Mike, he kept saying it wasn't safe. Eventually, we just stopped believing it was possible." Jane watched carefully, her mind analyzing every word. "You were held here by fear alone?" Sarah nodded weakly. "Mike kept saying the authorities would arrest us as spies. After a while, we couldn't tell if he was lying or genuinely afraid. It was easier, safer, to stop fighting." Robert's jaw tightened, anger flickering within him. He glanced sharply toward the doorway, sensing Mike's anxious presence lingering outside. "Mike, He called out firmly, voice tight with controlled anger. "Come in here." Mike entered hesitantly, his face pale and deeply ashamed. Sarah and Tom visibly tensed, their bodies instantly stiffening, eyes clouding with fear and resentment. Mike's voice cracked softly. "I need you both to know how sorry I am. There's no excuse. I failed you both terribly." Sarah's expression darkened, voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You didn't just fail us, Mike. You stole our lives. You imprisoned us in fear. How could you?" Tom's eyes flashed bitterly, his quiet voice laced with deep pain. "We trusted you more than anyone, and you betrayed us for a love affair." Mike winced visibly, the words hitting him hard. "I never intended it to be permanent. I believed it would all end, that I could fix everything eventually." Robert's voice hardened sharply. "You took away nearly 3 decades from them, Mike. 3 decades. Mike sank heavily into a chair, head bowed deeply, eyes filled with remorse. "I was afraid, not just for myself, but for Anna, too. Her father had influence, power. He could have destroyed all our lives easily." Jane spoke calmly, gently mediating the intense emotions. "Did Anna know what you were doing? Did she approve?" Mike hesitated painfully, shame deepening. "She knew, but she was also afraid. She begged me not to defy her father. It was a prison for all of us." Sarah's voice rose sharply, trembling with emotion. "You chose her fear over our lives. You let fear rule all our futures." Mike looked up desperately, pleading for understanding. "I was trapped. We were all trapped." Robert stood suddenly, pacing anxiously, emotions swirling violently. He struggled internally, wrestling with the reality of Sarah's pain, Tom's suffering, and Mike's choices. He felt both deep rage and relief, a confusing, exhausting mix. Jane observed Robert thoughtfully, sensing his internal conflict. "What happens next is your choice, Robert. Sarah and Tom need you to guide them." Robert nodded slowly, breathing deeply. "We start by leaving this place. Together, we'll sort out the rest later." Mike stood shakily, eyes desperately seeking forgiveness. "Please, let me help. Let me make amends." Sarah's eyes hardened sharply. "You can't fix what you've broken, Mike. You can't erase those years." Mike stepped forward pleadingly, desperate now. "I can't erase them, but I can tell you the truth. Anna's father threatened all of you. He said if I ever tried to help you escape, he would turn you all over as American spies. You'd never survive the Soviet prisons. I was trying to save your lives, even if it meant imprisoning you here." The room fell suddenly silent, Mike's revelation landing heavily. Jane's eyes widened slightly, processing rapidly. Robert stared incredulously, struggling with this new, shocking information. Sarah and Tom looked stunned, faces frozen in disbelief and confusion. Sarah's voice finally broke the silence, quivering painfully. "All these years you kept us locked away because of threat?" Mike nodded weakly, tears streaming openly. "I believed it was the only way to keep you alive." Robert stood frozen, the weight of Mike's words sinking in deeply. His mind spun chaotically, balancing the harshness of Mike's actions against the terrifying reality he'd faced. The room's tension thickened, every person locked in their thoughts, confronting the complexity and depth of their shared trauma. Outside, the snow fell silently, covering the past softly, relentlessly, yet unable to erase the pain that had marked them all so deeply. The silence following Mike's revelation was profound, filling the small, worn cabin with an unbearable heaviness. Each person stood frozen in their own thoughts, struggling to comprehend the tangled emotions that Mike's confession had brought to light. Robert felt his anger waver, now blurred by a deep sadness. Sarah and Tom stood speechless, their expressions shifted between disbelief, pain, and exhaustion. Jane, ever the pragmatic mediator, stepped forward cautiously, breaking the silence. "Mike," she began gently but firmly, "you made choices under extreme circumstances, but the consequences remain. What happens next is your decision." Mike's shoulders slumped under the weight of responsibility, his voice hoarse and trembling. "I've lived too long hiding from my actions. I need to face them now, no matter what that means." Robert exhaled slowly, his gaze meeting Mike's for the first time without rage, but instead filled with sorrowful understanding. "Then do the right thing, Mike. Turn yourself in. Let Sarah and Tom finally be free." Mike nodded solemnly, eyes glistening with tears. "I will. It's the only way I can truly apologize to all of you." Outside the cabin, snow continued to fall gently, blanketing the past softly yet persistently. Jane quietly arranged for local authorities to arrive, ensuring a peaceful and dignified surrender. As Mike stepped into the police car, he looked back one last time. Sarah met his gaze briefly, her eyes filled with unresolved pain, yet a faint glimmer of something resembling forgiveness flickered within. Robert gently touched Sarah's shoulder, drawing her close as the vehicle disappeared down the snow-covered path. "Let's go home," he whispered softly, his voice filled with hope and relief for the first time in decades. In the following days, preparations for their return to America were swift yet emotionally exhausting. Robert and Jane navigated bureaucratic challenges meticulously, offering Sarah and Tom constant reassurance and comfort throughout the overwhelming process. Finally, on a crisp morning, they stood quietly at the airport terminal, emotions swirling profoundly within each of them. Sarah gazed silently out the large windows, absorbing the familiar yet strangely foreign Russian landscape, memories flooding her thoughts. Tom stood quietly beside her, his expression thoughtful and reflective. Jane approached Robert discreetly. "This journey isn't over yet," she reminded him softly. "Their readjustment will be challenging. Patience will be key." Robert nodded thoughtfully, determination firm in his eyes. "Whatever it takes, Jane. Whatever they need." The flight back to Boise was emotionally charged and filled with long silences interspersed with quiet conversation. Sarah watched the clouds drip beneath them, wrestling internally with a sense of displacement and fear of the unknown. Tom closed his eyes frequently, clearly overwhelmed, lost in thought. Upon landing, stepping onto American soil after decades felt surreal. Their hometown greeted them with hesitant warmth. Familiar sights and smells blended strangely with new buildings and unfamiliar faces. Both Sarah and Tom felt acutely disconnected, time having created an invisible wall between them and their past lives. Returning to Robert's home was equally emotional. Sarah paused at the doorway, memories rushing back vividly. Her mother's laughter echoed softly in her mind, triggering an overwhelming wave of grief and longing. Robert gently squeezed her shoulder, sensing her internal struggle. Inside, photos lining the walls captured frozen moments from Sarah's childhood. She touched them gently, eyes misting with tears. Tom moved quietly through the rooms, visibly uncomfortable and restless, the sense of loss heavy upon him. Weeks passed slowly, each day a delicate balance of progress and setbacks. Robert watched his daughter struggle silently, her emotions oscillating unpredictably between joy and despair. Tom began therapy, bravely confronting the psychological wounds left by decades of isolation. Sarah's reintegration was particularly challenging. She often woke at night in a cold sweat, haunted by nightmares of imprisonment. But Robert's unwavering support gradually chipped away at her emotional walls. Together they explored old memories, rekindling fragile bonds and healing together. One gentle afternoon, Sarah and Robert sat together on the porch, sunlight warm on their faces. Sarah hesitated before speaking softly. "Dad, I miss Mom so much. There's a hole in my heart." Robert's eyes filled with empathy and sorrow. "I know, sweetheart. I miss her too, but she'd be incredibly proud of how strong you are." Sarah's lips trembled into a fragile smile, tears glistening. "I want to visit her." The next day, under a clear sky, Robert, Sarah, and Tom visited Sarah's mother's grave. Standing quietly before the headstone, Sarah knelt slowly, placing a small bouquet of flowers gently down. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks, decades of grief finally finding release. Robert placed a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder, voice soft but steady. She never stopped loving you, Sarah. She would have given anything to see this moment. Tom stood respectfully nearby, deeply moved by the emotional reunion. In that quiet moment, beneath the calm Idaho sky, they all felt a gentle sense of peace begin to fill the emptiness within. Days turned slowly into weeks, and gradually, fragile normalcy returned. Tom reconnected hesitantly with distant relatives, gaining emotional strength through their support. Sarah began painting again, a passion long forgotten yet powerfully therapeutic. Each brushstroke felt like reclaiming a piece of herself, healing wounds invisible yet profoundly deep. Jane Mitchell returned periodically, offering both professional guidance and genuine friendship. Her reflections on this deeply personal case often lingered heavily in her thoughts, recognizing it as the most emotionally complex of her career. She contemplated often about time, its power to destroy yet also to heal, and how fragile human choices could reshape lives irreversibly. One quiet evening, Jane shared dinner with Robert, Sarah, and Tom, her voice thoughtful yet steady. This journey taught me something invaluable. Freedom isn't just physical, it's emotional and mental. Mike imprisoned you, yes, but he imprisoned himself as well. Fear is its own kind of prison. Robert nodded deeply, grateful for her wisdom. Sarah met Jane's eyes gently, gratitude clear in her softened expression. Thank you, Jane, for everything. Eventually, Jane returned to her office, but she remained deeply impacted by the case. In quiet moments alone, she reflected profoundly on the intricate complexities of human emotions, choices, and forgiveness. Months later, on a bright, calm winter afternoon, Sarah sat alone by a window, sunlight softly illuminating her canvas. Outside, snow gently blanketed the landscape, eerily reminiscent yet beautifully peaceful. She dipped her brush carefully, colors blending gracefully as her hand guided the strokes intuitively. Robert entered quietly, observing her intently, warmth filling his heart at the genuine smile that gradually spread across Sarah's face, a smile he hadn't seen truly in decades. "What are you painting, Sarah?" he asked gently. She turned slowly, eyes brighter than he'd ever remembered. "The Russian forest," she replied softly, her voice serene yet powerful. "Not the place of captivity, but the beautiful place I first saw, the beauty beneath the fear." Robert smiled tenderly, deeply moved. "It's beautiful, Sarah." She nodded softly, eyes shimmering gently. "It's about hope, Dad. Survival. Life goes on despite everything. We get to choose how." He embraced her softly, feeling the deep sincerity and wisdom in her words, finally believing that healing was possible. Outside, the snow continued softly falling, gentle and persistent, a quiet reminder of both the past and the promise of renewal. Sarah turned back toward the canvas, her smile genuine and hopeful. She painted steadily, reclaiming her life with each careful stroke, capturing the beauty hidden even within the deepest pain. And there, within the quiet peace of the moment, she truly began again,